Good afternoon to all members of the Research Council and to the esteemed panelists for this afternoon session. I am pleased to present the completed paper on quantifying and visualizing SDG4 research, which is a bibliometric network analysis of all research on SDG4 in a period before and during the pandemic. The presentation covers 5 parts. I'll begin with the context and the problem, and then I'll talk about the method that I employed in going about this research, and I'll talk about the results, which consists of 2 parts: the performance analysis and the network mapping. And I'll end the presentation with some implications and concluding remarks. To start and to help us understand the context of this research, I know that many of us are doing research that align with the Sustainable Development Goals, which is a global public value framework where we can anchor our studies or research on. And this was adopted by the United Nations in 2015. So we are midway to the 2030 targets of the SDGs. The purpose of this is to end poverty, protect the planet, ensure that by 2030 all people enjoy peace and prosperity. There are 17 sustainable development goals which are interconnected, and each of these sustainable development goals is a very complicated topic or domain to research on. But I'd like to focus this study on one sustainable development goal alone, which could already translate into thousands of studies ever produced since 2015. Um, the target that I am including in this research is the SDG4, which is on quality education. And I'd like to present first the 10 educational targets or targets of SDG4 to help us appreciate the analysis that I'll be doing on the performance and the network of the research on SDG4. So SDG4 research targets that all girls and boys complete free, equitable, and quality primary and secondary education. All girls and boys have access to quality early childhood development care and pre-primary education. Equal access for women and men to affordable and quality technical, vocational, and tertiary education, including university. Substantially increase the number of youth and adults who have relevant skills, including tech voc, for employment purposes and landing on decent jobs and for entrepreneurial activities. SDG4 also targets to eliminate gender disparities in education and ensure all or equal access for the vulnerable, including persons with disabilities, people or indigenous peoples, and children who are vulnerable. Number 6 target is that all youth and substantial portion of adults, both men and women, achieve literacy and numeracy. Ensure that all learners acquire the knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development, such as gender equality and culture of peace and nonviolence. Build and upgrade educational facilities that are child, disability, and gender sensitive to provide safe, nonviolent, inclusive, and effective learning for or learning environments for all, and substantially expand globally the number of scholarships to developing countries for higher education, tech voc, ICT engineering programs in 2020, and increase the supply of qualified teachers. So these are the targets, and these are the prevailing themes or topics under sustainable development goals. Okay, so today, what we will be doing, or what I would like to present, is the result of a research that looks at the general performance of research on this sustainable development goal, and looking at also the structural and the dynamics of the different domains in the research or in all research under SDG 4. So basically, I'm trying to give an answer to the question, what researchers or what have researchers been up to when it comes to SDG 4 before and during the pandemic. So basically picked 2016 to 2019 as a pre-pandemic period, and 2020 to 2023 as the pandemic period. 2016 is a year after of the adoption of the SDG 17 SDGs. So I guess that's enough time for researchers to come up or to start working on research projects pertaining to SDG 4. So again, the pre-pandemic period is 2016 to 2019, and the pandemic period is 2020 to 2023. So these are the questions that I would like to specifically answer in this research. These are divided into two. The first one is on performance analysis. The other one is on network analysis. Under performance analysis, I would like to look at the production rate of SDG 4 research. How many is produced, or how many are produced, and who are producing this much, and in what year is we are producing this much number of research. Number two is the citation rate of SDG 4 research, which studies receive the most number of citations, highest H index, and other metrics related to citation. In which countries do most research on SDG 4 originate? What are the top publication venues of SDG 4 research, and which countries are closely collaborating on SDG 4 research? For the network analysis, I would like also to answer the following questions. What social domains are prevalently studied in SDG 4 research? How conceptually cohesive are the subdomains in each social domain of SDG 4 research? How do the social domains of SDG 4 research connect with each other? And how did the social domains of SDG 4 research conceptually evolve during and or before and during the pandemic? So these are the questions or problems that will be answered in this research. And in order to answer these problems or questions, I will be adopting the following methods. So under bibliometric analysis, to answer those bibliometric questions or performance analysis questions, I'll be plotting or mapping based on the metadata or metadata coming from the Scopus database. I'll be plotting them in Excel to look at the production rate or the production frequency and the percentage shares compared to the global production. I'll also look at the production trend in terms of time, the citations per document, cited documents, H index, and the percentage shares relative to the global citation rate. And then I'll look at the space which pertains particularly to the country where these publications are produced, and the sources or where these publications are published, which basically pertain to journals. And then the collaboration pattern using co-author analysis. I'd like to look at which of the countries are highly collaborating when it comes to SDG 4 research. And in order to look at the network map or the network mapping questions, I will be basically employing inclusion and association techniques using a tool. I'll also employ word co-occurrence to look at the pattern of co-occurrence among the different keywords of the different topics or the different studies on SDG 4. I'll be presenting them in strategic diagrams, evolution map, and stability map. All right. So for us to appreciate these methods, as these methods are used to answer the previous questions, I'd like to present to you how specifically this is done in this research. So using the Scopus database, I employed or I used the predetermined or the pre-existing advanced search technique under UN Sustainable Development Goals, which follows or which uses the following syntax. These are the keywords and the presentation keywords or the syntax used in the search for documents. So when we enter this in the database, a total of 101,400 documents were registered starting from as early as 1940s. until 2023. But because we are interested in studies that are generated in 2016 and 2023, we limit the documents into these years, and we also applied English as one of our inclusion parameters. So for documents that satisfy the inclusion criteria year 2016 2023 and English language, it returns 49,781 documents, which is the number of documents that were entered for analysis. So these documents were downloaded in RIS and in CSV formats. The RIS is the format that can be read by SciMAT, and the CSV format is the format that can be read by the Excel and the VOSViewer. So this is an example, or this is the interface of the SciMAT tool or the SciMAT software and the VOSViewer. The SciMAT is on the left, which basically also looks at or presents the different steps employed in this Cymat analysis, which includes the selection of the period. And in this case, I selected 2016-2019 as period 1, which is the pre-pandemic period, and 2020 to 2023 as period 2, or the pandemic period. The selection or the unit of analysis is words. Data reduction includes articles having or keywords that appear in at least 25 articles. And then I use association matrix. Network reduction is 10 for the highest, or the maximum is 10. The lowest is 3. Clustering algorithm is this central algorithm. Document mapper is the primary or the core document mapper, and the secondary document mapper. Quality measures, I use index, citation index, and H index. And then the analysis is associational and inclusion. For the VOSViewer, we use the VOSViewer to look at the pattern of association among authors when it comes to the research that they are producing. So this is an example of a what you can find or what you can see in a VOSViewer. So as a result, when we look at the performance or the production and the citation and the time and space details of the research, or of the 49,780 research, we have this first table. The first value there pertains to F, or the number of documents or the frequency of documents. The second is the percentage relative to the total number of documents. The total number of documents that we use here is the 49,780. So that's the percentage relative to the 49,000 documents. C is the number of citations. CPD is the citation per document, which we divide basically the citations over the number of documents that are citable. CD is the cited documents. This is important in knowing how much or what percentage of the documents are being cited. And the H index is calculated by the number of documents with that much and number of citations. And percent GSP is the global share of production, which is the percentage of that particular rate compared to the global production rate. Global share of citation is basically the percentage of that particular citation compared to the global citation rate. So in this case, we can see that the United States, United Kingdom, and Australia topped the list of countries that produce studies on Sustainable Development Goal number 4, or SDG 4. United States produced about 23% of the total studies produced on SDG 4 in the given period. So if you look at United States, United Kingdom, and Australia, this basically comprises a big bulk already of the studies. And if you add up other remaining Western countries in the list, that could basically translate into about or over half of the studies globally conducted on SDG 4 are coming from Western countries. But it is also important to compare the citation per document in these countries, where we can find that countries like the United States, United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, and Germany are the ones that produce the top or the quality studies. Quality by quality I mean very citable research, which has a value of 9, 10, 11 citations per document. So each paper produced in these countries will gain at least 9 or 10 citations at an average. So that's a big value compared to countries like China, Russia, and Brazil. At 3 and 5, we can say that China and Brazil and Russia have relatively smaller citations per document rate, which also translates into other indices like the H index. For the United States, we can say that there are 99 documents in the United States that have at least 99 citations each. The lowest in terms of H index is actually Russian Federation, which has an H index of 28, which means that there are 28 documents with at least 28 citations each. When it comes to the global citation share and the global share of production, United States always top the list. So this is the performance of the studies on SDG 4 across different countries. And I'd like to move now to the publication venues of these documents in the United States. Studies or documents are published in mostly in Education Policy Analysis Archives, published by Arizona State University, which is in quartile 2, which is a high quartile journal. In UK, it's published in International Journal of Inclusive Education at Taylor and Francis, which is at Q1. And if you look at the pattern of production or publication in this list, we can say that it's only Russia, China, and Brazil that publish papers in not so quality journals or in lower quartile journals. So it could give us an idea which countries are producing quality papers landing on quality journals, which basically get the attention of the global scholarship when it comes to SDG 4. In terms of subject matters, as expected, because this is SDG 4 in quality education, most of the papers fall under social sciences, and as also expected, it also has papers on psychology and medicine. So now we look at the collaboration pattern among countries by using co-author analysis. So here we use the VOSViewer and look at the network visualization in the global landscape. We can say that one group of research is within the scope of the United States or in the network of the United States, which includes the Philippines. So in this illustration, we can see that the Philippines exhibit closest connection with the United States when it comes to the themes and the pattern or the methodological pattern of studies on SDG 4. So the Philippines belongs to the cluster of, or one cluster of studies, which includes the United States. So another cluster includes some of the Islamic states and the Middle East countries like Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and which also connects with India. So culturally, we can say that this could be the reason why these studies conducted in this area are similar. Another similar studies are conducted in the United Kingdom, South Africa, and other African countries. So it's actually the UK that is similar to the studies in Africa. And we have another cluster in red for countries in Europe, which mainly includes Germany, Sweden, Norway, Finland, and it includes the Russian Federation. On your topmost part, we can find there the Latin America and the Hispanic countries, which is also understandable when they have a similar cluster or a different cluster of topics or studies on SDG 4. So just to illustrate, I also have there, or I presented here the specific map of the Philippines based on this network visualization, we can see the limited connection of the Philippines. It connects to very few countries, a little in the west, or a little in Europe. It connects in Brazil, particularly in South Africa, and primarily it connects with the United States, which is different in the case of Hong Kong, because Hong Kong is more versatile, more flexible, as it connects to most or to many countries, as illustrated there. And apparently, when you look at the case of the United States almost has presence in all clusters, which means that United States is at the core of research when it comes to UN Sustainable Development Goal number 4. Here is the result of the SciMat analysis, which basically looks at the structure and the dynamics of domains or themes in SDG 4 research. So we have here a visualization of the different domains or the different topics. We have here in photo B, or in figure B, we have the strategic diagram before the pandemic, and figure C is the strategic diagram during the pandemic. In order for us to understand or appreciate this strategic diagram, I would like to direct your attention to the 4 different quadrants in this strategic diagram. So the first quadrant, if you can find there, is the upper right quadrant, which is basically the high density and high centrality. If we say the density is how cohesive the studies within a particular cluster is, then we can say that the higher the density, the more cohesive are the subdomains in that particular domain. Centrality is the relationship or the connectedness of that particular domain to another domain. So in this case, those domains that fall in quadrant 1, which is high density and high centrality quadrant, we can say that it is highly developed both internally and highly connected externally. So we can say that those domains that fall in quadrant 1, high density, high centrality quadrant, we can say that these are the most important and the most essential domains in SDG 4 research. So in this case, in the pre-pandemic, we can say that the most important and the most essential domains include medical student, childhood, human, sex difference, and self-report. In the pandemic period, we have the equivalent there: adolescent, caregiver, school teacher skill, observational study, prevention and control, and socioeconomics. If you move to the leftmost part, which is the high density, low centrality, which means that the domains that fall in this particular quadrant are highly cohesive internally, but they lack connection with other domains in SDG 4 research. And if you move down, these are domains that are low in density and low in centrality, meaning to say it's either an emerging new domain or concept in the field of SDG 4 research, or it is a dying concept, or a concept that used to be in other quadrants, but downscaled into the third quadrant, which is a lower density, lower centrality quadrant. And the 4th quadrant in your lower left is the high centrality, low density, which is very connected to other domains, but internally it is now disintegrating. Not so many studies anymore are conducted in the development of the different subdomains under that particular domain, but that the domain itself is highly connected with other domains in SDG 4 research. So that is the basis of our analysis of the different domains and the movement of domains, or we call it the evolution of domains or the evolution of themes in SDG 4 research. On your left, your figure A is what we call as the evolution map, or the movement of the different domains into from pre-pandemic period, or the longitudinal analysis of the movement of the themes or domains from the pre-pandemic period to the pandemic period. So we have here lines that you can find in solid are the lines that are conceptually connected to that particular domain in the next period. In this case, for example, self-report is conceptually connected to observational study. We call it the conceptual nexus. Self-report is a component, or is connected as component or within the component nexus to socioeconomics, and that is illustrated in broken lines. So the broken lines that you can find there illustrates that one is a component of the other, while the solid line illustrates that one is basically the same concept as the other, except that it evolved into something else, which may have some some nuances in terms of its composition and in terms of its scope. So that is what is happening in some of the domains in this research, or in SDG4 research, which I am about to discuss one by one. So the first one, or the first movement, by the way, I also looked at the overlapping map. In this case, this first circle with 4440 figure is the first period, or the pre-pandemic period, and then the one with the 5305 is the pandemic period. This means that in the pre-pandemic period, there are 4,440 subdomains, which moved, or in which 4,005 or 4005 of those moved to the second period, or during the pandemic period. In this case, if we look at the map, 435 of the subdomains in the pre-pandemic period were left out, or were not anymore, or did not appear anymore in the pandemic period. But there are 1,300 new concepts, or new themes, or new domains that joined, or that entered the pandemic period. In this case, as shown in the stability index, we can say that the studies, or the domains in the pandemic and in the pre-pandemic period, are at 90%, or is 90% stable, meaning to say 90% of the characteristics of the domains are being forwarded from one period to another. So some of the impressions include 90% stability, 435 outgoing, 1,300 incoming subdomains. So that is the analysis of the overlapping map. So that's how we looked at the movement, or the evolution of the themes or domains between the two periods. Now we look at specifically the different domains and the movement of the domain. So in this case, if you look at the left side of your screen, we can have here the relationship of self-report to other parts. So we can find here that in pre-pandemic, self-report is in quadrant 1, but it breaks into several other concepts, which are basically self-report. It is conceptually connected to observational study and caregiver. So we say here, still the observational study and caregiver belong to quadrant 1, which can be translated as a high cohesive and highly connected domains, or we call it the essential and the important domains. So self-report reduced into observational and caregiver concepts. Our impressions include that during the pandemic period, we prefer studies on or longitudinal studies, and studies that involve active interaction between the researcher and the subject, which is different from the self-report in the pre-pandemic period, which is highly passive, as a characteristic of a self-report, wherein surveys, for example, are administered without the intervention of the researcher. The pandemic period also prefers cross-sectional surveys over single group or case analysis. In the text, I provided several sample of studies that support this. Caregivers emerge as a significant source of data, or as significant sources of data, because of the role of caregivers to young learners and learners who are challenged, or who are vulnerable. The intervention type is preferred in the pandemic period, rather as compared with the pre-pandemic period. So that is the situation of the self-report, which is a highly methodological concept in this presentation. Another one is a conceptual aspect in our result. The role of humans, or human beings. Human samples have expanded from the main or mainly described in the pre-pandemic period as covering the adolescents, the male and the female. But in the pandemic period, it expands its definition of humans to include already school teachers as a crucial element of research. And it also defines human as both an actor and an outcome of learning. So research in the pandemic period treats humans as an outcome, not just an actor of learning, but also as an outcome of learning. So this is where we started talking or doing research about student engagement and student attainment, or student achievement. So the next one is the emphasis on educational reform from educational policy, which basically belongs to the for the third quadrant, low centrality, low density, but they merit our attention because this appears to be an emerging theme in the SDG4 research. So the SDG4 research encourages studies that will have implication on reform, directly on reform, rather than on policies and or guidelines. So must focused on educational reform rather than a very passive treatment of educational policies. It also talks about investing in education in here uh, in this domain. Next is the switching from disability to inclusion, which basically which basically underscores the focus on the institutional level rather than on the individual level. During the pandemic period, we look at, or research started to look at institutions as important research subject rather than the person possessing the disability. So we are now shifting from studies on how to help an individual person, but on the empowerment of an institution to be able to address or to be able to take care of the welfare of the differently abled students, for example. So it talks about institutional policies, laws, and interventions. Basically, it is a switch from special educational needs, which is a very passive concept, to special needs education, which is highly institutional and highly active in a sense. And then finally, there are two concepts that emerge here if you look at the lower left, low density, low centrality, which is an emerging thing in or topic or domains in research: migration and climate change. Migration talks about welfare of undocumented students, pedagogical implications of migration. This pertains to the challenges that teachers face when they have to deal with a new wave of students migrating into the country or into the particular area, and also on the learning challenges on the side of the students, the challenges that they encounter when they have to migrate or to move to another place to study. It also talks about digital migration, and climate change emerges as a hot domain in SDG4 because in during the pandemic, people are already scared and anxious, and now they are beginning to be anxious of anything that could disrupt education in general, and that includes climate change. So one of the things that changed among the students during the pandemic is that the students are getting the attention of climate change, or is already interested in climate change, because generally students are anxious of any form of disruption because of the experience in with COVID-19 pandemic. It talks about awareness and attitude of students to climate change. And I'll end with some conclusions and implications in terms of the performance, but the bibliometric performance. SDG4 research is largely influenced by the Western epistemology. So we have to take that into consideration when we do research because of this epistemological bias. Research in Asia is largely influenced by the United States, as you have seen the clusters. So we'd like to take this as an opportunity in building our research niche within SDG4. Quality studies on SDG4 are from the US, UK, Australia, Canada, and Germany. So we have to take that into consideration when we submit into a journal. So we have to look at the composition of the journal or the journal itself, where it is originating from, because if it is run by authors or editors coming from these countries, then they must have also a certain level or degree of bias against studies that resonate the studies that they do in the respective countries. And in terms of the network map, nothing much has changed during the pandemic about SDG4. It means that SDG4 remains a very progressive research field, and it encourages everyone to engage in research on SDG4. During the pandemic, we prefer observational research rather than self-report research, which is wider and deeper in scope. In terms of our own research, perhaps it is also a good consideration to adopt active intervention, cross-sectional, and longitudinal methods as our methodologies or approaches in our research. Human is broadly defined both as actor and outcome of education here in this research. So when we treat human subjects as the as an essential subject of research because human subjects remain a very important source of information about SDG 4. Education reform is gaining attention in SDG 4 research. So research must explore in its implication for educational reform. So when we do research about or related to SDG 4, we have to take into consideration the educational reform that our research can potentially contribute to. Another conclusion, inclusive education relies heavily on institutional action or intervention. For us as researchers, when we do research on inclusive education, we must highlight the role of the institution. We are not saying that we discount the role of the individual learners who are having or who are vulnerable or are disabled, but we have to prioritize on the impact of our studies on the institutional scale rather than on the individual scale. And finally, we look at migration and climate change as the next big domains on SDG 4. So our challenge is for us to engage perhaps in research pertaining to these two next big things in SDG 4 research, migration and climate change. And with that, I guess I have covered entirely what this research is all about. Thank you for listening, and I'm ready to answer your questions.